Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. In Hebrew, it's Yom HaShoah. The Holocaust was a systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Holocaust is a word of Greek origin meaning sacrifice by fire. The Nazis who came to power in Germany in January 1933 believed that the Germans were racially superior and that the Jews deemed inferior were an alien threat to the so-called German racial community. In 1933, the Jewish population of Europe stood at over 9 million people. Most European Jews lived in countries that Nazi Germany would occupy or influence during World War II. By 1945, the Germans and their collaborators killed nearly 2 out of every 3 European Jews as part of the final solution, the Nazi policy to murder the Jews of Europe. Today on Perspective, my guests are Mendel Good and Valerie Blau, who are Holocaust survivors. The interview has been pre-recorded, and I'll be playing some excerpts. Let's listen now to Mendel Good and Valerie Blau.
For a Holocaust survivor, to speak about his experience is a horrible thing, because when we do, we go back, think about terrible experiences that we did live through and the losses that we incurred. The truth of the matter is that Holocaust survivors for many years did not speak about our experiences. Unfortunately, we had to start not to speak about it, but to defend ourselves, because we were dealing with a fellow called Zandl, Ernest Zandl in Toronto, a teacher from the West called Kingstra, a teacher from the East called Rose. All of them were Holocaust deniers. And ladies and gentlemen, to them I say, I wish you were right. Because if they were right, our children would have ever known or heard the name of grandfather or grandmother, uncle and aunt or cousin. From the tremendous family that I come from, my father was the youngest of 8. I had many, many, many cousins. My immediate family consisted of 2 brothers and a sister. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm the only survivor from a tremendous large family. The age of the average Holocaust survivor today is in the high 80s. We lose an average between 10 and 12% every year from natural causes, illnesses, age, and whatnot. In the next few years, there will be hardly a Holocaust survivor remain that could tell you really what has transpired.
When we look back at the Holocaust and the rise to power of Hitler and his henchmen and the killing machine, can you help us understand how many of the people in Germany were behind Hitler? What was going on? Were they hypnotized in a sense to hate and to kill and to exterminate?
To give you, in a few seconds, a perspective about Hitler. Hitler himself was not even German. He came from Austria, from a little town called Braunau. Hitler was a failure in his life. He was not able to accomplish anything. But when the First World War broke out, he volunteered into the German army. During that war of the 4.5 years, anyone that almost sneezed loud enough, went up in rank, or he was decorated. Hitler went into the army as a corporal, and after four and a half years, that's all he came out with, is being a corporal. He had a good mouthpiece, loud. He was jailed in 1928 because he tried to overtake the German government. In 1933, Hitler actually tried to burn the Reichstag, the German parliament.
For what reason?
Because at that time, Berlin was called the Red Berlin. The communists were extremely active. So he did it. He did the burning, but he went to see Hindenburg, the president of Germany, and he sold him a bill of goods that he is the only one that could destroy the communists. And he was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Now, when he came to power, it has to be understood, he actually built 3 concentration camps. One was Dachau, the other one was Buchenwald, and the third one was Sachsenhausen. Lo and behold, none of them were for the Jews. They were for 5 categories of people, mainly for clergy, for communists, for intelligentsia, and for homosexuals. And the last one was they called Berufsverbrecher, professional thieves. That was what the German people fell for.
This is Perspectives. My name is Barry Shainbaum. Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. My guest in a pre-recorded interview is Mendel Good and his wife, Valerie Blau. Mendel lost his whole family in the death camps, and Valerie lost her parents and her only brother. We're going to go to a music break, and it's taken from the CD March of the Living. The March of the Living is an educational event that brings together thousands of Jewish youth from around the world to Poland and Israel. And I'm going to play a song called Ani Ma'amin. The lyrics to Ani Ma'amin were written in the 12th century by the Jewish philosopher Moses Maimonides, were the last words of hope and defiance recited by many Jews before they perished in the Holocaust. Ani Ma'amin.
Ani Ma'amin Be'emuna Shlema Be'viat HaMashiach Ani Ma'amin
Ami Mamin is performed by the Habanim Youth Choir from the CD Songs for March of the Living. This is Holocaust Remembrance Day. Let's continue on with my interview with Mendel Good and Valerie Blau.
I was in 7 concentration camps, 2 ghettos, and twice in jail.
When you were in each of these camps, did you ever think that you would ever come out alive?
In one of the camps that I was in a lumber camp in Poland. While we were unloading lumber, and the lumber was tied with steel around 1/2 inch wide. And while I was cutting open that steel, something came to me. I cut myself a little piece of maybe 1.5 inches wide, long, 1/2 inch wide. And I have made a decision that I don't care whatever happens to me, I will not give Hitler the satisfaction to get rid of me. I was hiding it because we used to be searched sometimes a few times a day. I used to hide it. I wrapped it around a piece of cement paper. And I used to hide it sometimes in my mouth, sometimes under my arms. I wouldn't raise my arms high enough so I shouldn't lose it. And it came quite handy because years later, in Austria, in a place called Mauthausen, one of the worst camps, I was diagnosed with TB, and I was taken the next morning to the gas chamber, knowing that it was the gas chamber. I took out that little piece of steel. This was already in the middle, sometimes, of 1944. The guards at that time were already older people because all the young people were enlisted in the army or into the German army. And I took out that little piece. I was only maybe the 4th or the 5th to get into the chamber. And I took out that little piece of steel and I slashed myself. They're still very visible under my chin. I know I sprinkled this older guard with blood. I have no explanation. He just grabbed my arm and threw me. Of course, I didn't weigh very much. It wasn't too difficult.
So he grabbed your arm and threw you where?
Just threw me a few feet away.
Right.
I took that little piece of cement paper and plastered under my chin. Took me almost a year after the liberation to get rid of it because I used to pinch tiny little pieces. It stuck so well, that cement, to my chin that it took me almost a year after, but it's still very visible.
And the reason you cut yourself
I
is?
did that not to give Hitler the satisfaction to get rid of me. I would rather do it myself than give him the satisfaction. And this is the only reason I did it.
What was a typical day like in the concentration camps?
Well, the bells would ring probably very early in the morning. We would get off the bunks. Some of them had to go to the kitchen to bring the coffee and that tiny little slice of bread. The coffee was not real coffee. They called it ersatz. It was some kind of a mixture, I don't know of what, but it was not coffee. Then we had to line up in front of the barrack and be counted. And we were sent to all kinds of different work, cleaning the streets, building highways, working in mines, replacing rails when they were bombed, all kinds of, whatever they needed us to clean up after a bombardment. And many of us just died without being exterminated.
The staff that you came, of these camps that you came in contact with every day, were they all across the board rough, evil, nasty people, or was there ever an occasional bit of humanity from one of the guards towards you?
In the 5.5 years that I spent in the concentration camp, the only decent human being that I met is the one that grabbed my arm and threw me after I had him bloodied probably from the top to the bottom.
This is Holocaust Remembrance Day on Perspectives. I'm going to play another song from the Habanim Choir from the CD Songs for March of the Living, and that's called Oseh Shalom. This popular Jewish refrain, which dates back to the 10th century, expresses the yearning for peace for all of Israel. And the soloist is Megan Bachner. She was a participant in the 1990 March of the Living visit back to Poland to visit the death camps. Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom, Shalom b'mromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al Yisrael, amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom b'mromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al Yisrael, amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom b'mromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Ve'al Yisrael, amen.
And that's Megan Bachner singing Oseh Shalom. Let's bring on now Valerie Blau, the wife of Mendel Good, and I asked her which of the concentration camps she lived in during the Holocaust.
I've been in about 4 different camps. I was only a year in the camps because I'm a Hungarian. And the Hungarians, they didn't take till 1944. And I was in Auschwitz, Gelsenkirchen, Essen, and Bergen-Belsen.
When you were in these camps, did you ever lose hope that you would make it out alive?
I never thought about it. I was very young, and I was just glad to live day by day, and we never thought about liberating.
Valerie, how many brothers and sisters and uncles and
I had
aunts?
only one little brother. It was 5 years old.
And do you know where your brother is now?
No.
Okay.
I was separated from my mother in 1944 when I came to Auschwitz. And I thought that it was, this was the end, because most of the children were killed. And I never thought about my mother or my little brother that would be alive. And 1940, it was end of 1944. When I came to Bergen-Belsen, I was together with my two aunts, my mother's two sisters. And that was the luck that I am still alive. In 1944 end, or 1945, a big, they were cleaning up the camp because it was a typhoid epidemic. And one of the fellows that was cleaning up asked if anybody from our town was in there. And somebody said that one of my mother's sisters. And I was about 3 weeks after the liberation that I almost died from typhoid fever.
Valerie, how old were you when you were in the concentration camp?
I was 15.
15
I was 14.
years old. You know, it's so hard to imagine. Here we are in a glorious country called Canada, and your typical 14, 15-year-old is in high school and having a good life. And even if you're in a poverty-stricken part of Toronto or even a rough part of Vancouver, but we're in Canada, it's nearly unimaginable to imagine living in a death camp and not knowing if you'll be alive the next day, and knowing that your relatives might be dead, maybe gassed, maybe shot. It's, you know, when you look back at the evil committed by these people, by the Nazis, can you fathom how such evil could come to the leaders and the people would follow with such evil?
No.
And Mendel, like, again, it's like, how can we understand how these things happen? Like, for instance, right now we have versions of mass slaughters going on in the world, in Rwanda, in Sudan, and other places, and hundreds of thousands of people are murdered. And if there's not oil involved or other issues, the world sort of sits by. How do you understand this, Mendel?
The truth of the matter, we don't. It's not too often that Valerie and I speak about our experiences. We were there. We went through every human degradation that you can imagine. We saw millions of people being destroyed. And we still have a hard time to comprehend what really has happened, how human beings in the civilized world of ours, and if you look back, you have to realize the example that the Germans have shown to the world. You could expect it not even from Idi Amin, but definitely not from a very civilized population, people like the Germans were. Because one of the greatest music, one of the greatest literature, industrially, a lot of it came from there, that people could dehumanize themselves and dehumanize other people by the millions. It's unthinkable. And this is really one of the reasons that the few of us that are still here, survivors from the Holocaust, have a duty to tell what has really transpired. We owe it to the people, to the good people, Canadian people. We owe it to the country, we owe it to the government. Because this is the first time in our lives, because in reality we were stateless until we came to Canada.
Mendel, what were the reasons the Nazis gave for their hatred and therefore desire to exterminate the Jewish people?
The truth is, there was no valid reason whatsoever.
What reason did they give? Did they make up then?
Well, that the Jews are running the world, that they're controlling the world, and it was very easy for them to take away everything that for hundreds and hundreds of years families accumulated, to take it away from them and give it to the others. And the people liked it. The economic situation since 1918 was not great. We must admit to that. So taking away from one that has and give it to the other one, the people accepted it. And that's exactly what happened.
Let's talk about they called him the angel of death, Dr. Joseph Mengele, physician who was able to do his research because people were captives, the Jews were captives, and did his scientific and medical experiments on living beings, just as evil as Hitler. What do you say?
He was not the only one. He was just the one that became very famous. We sometimes point out certain individuals. The truth is that they could not do it all by themselves. There had to be other people that was helping. Now, one example. Since the liberation of 1945, there wasn't one individual that ever stood up and admitted guilt. Killing, destroying so many millions of people could not have been done by one individual, be it an Eichmann. It's just impossible. We have to remember that there were 5 or 6 extermination camps. There was Auschwitz and Birkenau. You had Treblinka, you had Majdanek, you had Belzec, you have others. That didn't happen by one person. There were leaders. But yet, since 1945, not one individual ever stood up and said, I'm sorry, I did wrong.
There is supposed to be a large enclave of retired Nazi officers living down in Paraguay and other parts of South America. Why are the governments of these countries in South America providing safe haven for these people, in your opinion?
Well, according from what we know from all the writings and all the books, they were paid off. They were paid off. Some of the leaders in some of the Latin American countries were of German descent. And there was so much money that they had, the Nazis, that fled. And there were quite a few books written of other organizations that helped them get there. Take a case of Eichmann in Argentina.
Who helped get him there?
The church.
The Roman Catholic Church?
It's been documented.
Why would they help him?
Well, You know, I really don't like to get into theology. I am not competent enough. But the fact is, it's documented. It's not for me just to say it, but it is documented.
But why would the church want to help someone like this?
Well,
I mean,
not
what's
everybody
in it
like-
for them?
Not everybody liked the Jews. Unfortunately. I know myself. Like I say, I don't like to speak on theology. I was invited to a church in Ottawa, and the invitation told me I'll be speaking to an upper middle class Catholic audience. And I showed 20 minutes video. And unfortunately, I didn't see the video before. I would have never shown it. It was the development of anti-Semitism. Now, you figure out where it came from.
Okay.
I was sitting in a Catholic church, and my opening remarks were very simple. You realize now, because the title they asked me to speak on was Why Shoah? Why Holocaust? I said, you realize now that it wasn't us Jews that created the Shoah. And I even made a little comment, a little joke. It says, I always wondered why Sammy Davis Jr. converted to Judaism. He didn't have enough problems being black.
You're listening to the voice of Mendel Good. My name is Barry Shainbaum. This is Perspectives. Mendel talked about Dr. Joseph Mengele, known as the Angel of Death. He conducted experiments on Jewish children. He was only one of a number of Nazi doctors. They did experiments like experiments on twins, bone, muscle, and nerve transplantation experiments, freezing experiments, malaria experiments, experiments with mustard gas, seawater, sterilization, poison, bombs, and others. It's hard to imagine that human beings could stoop so very low. Let's take another music break from the Hubbanim Choir from Songs for March of the Living. This song is called Eli Eli, A Walk to Caesarea. The lyrics to Eli Eli were written by Hannah Senesh, who was executed by the Nazis on November the 7th, 1944, after she parachuted into Yugoslavia to join in resistance efforts aimed at helping her Jewish brethren. Eli Eli.
Shall
listening to the Hubbaning Choir singing songs for March of the Living that was called Eli, Eli. For mentally ill survivors, the Holocaust lingers on today. In Israel, at some of the homes for the Holocaust survivors, some patients refuse to shower because it reminds them of the gas chambers. Others hoard meat in pillowcases because they fear going hungry. Many patients remain frozen in time. 65 years later, sometimes they scream, "The Nazis are coming." While most survivors have gone on to live productive lives, others have not been able to get past the craziness, the horrors of the Holocaust. Some have been driven insane and are in institutions, but there they wear pajamas. But wearing pajamas reminds them of concentration camp inmate uniforms. Holocaust survivors have a higher rate of suicide. 80% have trouble sleeping, and 2/3 suffer from emotional distress. Let's continue on with my interview with Mendel Good and Valerie Blau. I asked Mendel when he moved to Canada how he continued with his life. Mendel Good.
I also spent 3.5 years after the liberation and over 2 years in TB sanatorium with tuberculosis and whatnot, any sickness you can dream of. After 3 years, almost 3.5 years, a commission from Canada came looking for tradespeople. They were looking for tailors, for shoemakers, for carpenters, electricians. I registered as a tailor. I had hardly any inkling about tailoring. And when I was called before the Canadian consul, and he looked at my resume, that I was 14 years old when I went to the first, what they called at that time, Zwangsarbeitslager, forced labor camp. And I wasn't liberated till May, either 7th or the 8th, 1945. So the consul had a question for me. He says, "When did you learn to be a tailor? Are you sure you're a tailor?" I says, "Yes." He said, he had a quiz question for me. He said, "Could you stitch a suit out of sand?" I says, "Yes." He says, "How are you going to do that?" I says, "If you'll cut it for me, I'll stitch it." He grabbed a stamp and he hit my visa, my papers. He almost broke the desk, and he started to laugh. We ended up being, yes, I came to Canada on September the 8th, 1948. I had a little job in Ottawa, but I told my boss right away that I come from the old country, and whatever I know may not be very valid in this new country. And I only ask of you one thing. You show me once, you'll see I'll make you happy. And we became the greatest of friends. And I was with them for over a year. I couldn't learn there anymore. So I went to a different place to improve my knowledge. And after 3 years, meanwhile, I met my lovely wife.
How did the two of you meet?
And that's...
We only have 15 minutes left,
yeah,
so...
Okay. Of course, I didn't speak a word English. Finally, after a few the experiences today, they sound funny, but they weren't funny then, if you don't speak the language. I decided to start the classes for new Canadians. And I went the first night, and there's this beautiful girl, 18 years old, standing. And I was told by a friend of mine that came with me that he was almost positive that he saw her after the war in Bergen-Belsen. I'm sure every man's eye must have turned towards her. even today, she's still a beautiful looking woman. After 56 years of marriage life, very happy married life, I walked over to her, and there was a friend with her, a little short little lady, and I spoke to her in German. I figured if she was liberated in Bergen-Belsen, she must. And her friend, not knowing who I was, so she made a very bad comment. She says that I am not to talk to me because I'm a dirty Polak. And it's true, I didn't look Jewish at all. I took her home that night, and that was it.
I've heard from many people whose parents were Holocaust survivors that it can be very challenging. Now, you have 3 children, Beverly, Gloria, and Bernie, and 7 grandchildren.
8.
8 now, Mazel Tov. In this day and age, when people from my generation, younger and older, have problems, we may go to a psychotherapist, a doctor, counseling. You didn't probably have counseling, did you? How did you get your act together so that your children didn't have it that hard, or did they, growing up in your home?
It wasn't easy. That was one of the great traumas in our lives, because they would come home from school and they would always make some comment about a grandfather, a grandmother, an uncle, an aunt, that they gave them gifts, birthday parties, and whatnot. Unfortunately, we don't know how we did it. We didn't have any formula. But one thing we do know, we are so grateful that all of them came out all right, that there was no effect, mental and otherwise.
To come through those horrors, and did you have any counseling? Did you have therapy? Did you get it?
I counseled myself, and I still do. I make a joke out of it. I says, I talk to a smart guy. So I talk to myself.
Every time you look in the mirror, right? Do you believe in God?
There were times we had a right not to believe, but I wanted to live a normal, traditional life. So the fact is that for a number of years after the liberation, I was troubled. How will I ever say thank you and reciprocate to my parents for what they gave me? And like a miracle, when Valerie and I were discussing marriage, and she told me that she would like to carry on a traditional home, I almost broke down from happiness. We lived a traditional home. We raised our children properly. They all graduated from Hebrew schools and higher education.
Mendel, I want to bring you back to the question. Time is running tight. Many people who survived the death camps say, if there was a God, where was God? Therefore, they don't believe in God. Do you believe in a higher power?
I really cannot answer that.
Okay.
I'm just grateful to whatever power it is to still give me the opportunity to live what I call the so-called normal life. Because in reality, in the best of occasions, in the happiest of occasions, it's really not normal. But I do not blame anybody for not believing. I will never point the finger, ever. Because with all what they went through and all the losses, nobody has a right to point a finger at them.
Mendel, were your children raised in any type of religious environment? Did they go to Hebrew school?
All of them. As a matter of fact, I was very much involved to start a Hebrew high school in Ottawa.
Okay.
I was very much involved to start a Hebrew high school, a school and a high school in Ottawa. Yes.
Mendel, do you live more in the past, present, or future?
We cannot live in the past anymore, as traumatic it is. We have a family, we have an obligation to them. We have 8 grandchildren that be looking forward for every day to give us certain joys. So we live for them, and we're hoping for the few years that we have left to take advantage of every moment that we have.
Thank you. Mendel, do you have any favorite quotations that you go over in your mind to give you peace and solace and strength and or forgiveness?
You cannot live with the past. You have to hope for the future. And you hope that this great country of ours that gave us the first time peace, because most of the Holocaust survivors, they were taken away from their families when they were underage, undereducated, without a trade and a profession. This country, this most beautiful country called Canada, gave us the opportunities, that unlimited opportunities. So we are living, doing the best with what we have, and hoping for all Canadians to have the most wonderful future.
This is Holocaust Remembrance Day on Perspectives. My name is Barry Shainbaum. My guests have been Mendel Good and Valerie Blau. Thank you for tuning in. Have a fabulous week.